It's Rachel Blevins, who joins me from the USA. Let's start with the Chinese Olympic story, Rachel, because I know I was probably the only person in the world to see it because nobody watches it anymore. I saw CNN almost give over their entire channel to anti-China propaganda. And yet still 17 million people watched an opening ceremony that took the breath away. 17 million Americans, I mean. What's the real view in America about this?
You know, it's interesting because, of course, when you mention CNN at the moment, they're just trying to get people to watch their channel because their viewership is down over 77% over the last year. Now, when it comes to the overwhelming majority of Americans, you know, I think we're in this place where we've had 20 years of this ongoing war on terrorism. We get to the end of that as the United States decides it. And then now they've decided that the two new targets are going to be China and Russia. And so you have a number of people who look at this, you know, new decided bad guy as it comes from the U.S. establishment, and they may have concern about that in one way or another. But then you have the people who just become completely, they get to the point where it's like they've heard so much of this, they've heard so much of sort of the boy who cried wolf when it comes to the media and whoever their bad guy is of the moment, that they completely tune it out and they don't pay attention to the consequences of all of that warmongering. They don't pay attention to what happens when the United States continues to ramp up its military involvement around the world, when it continues to, you know, carry out these freedom of navigation exercises, as it refers to them, right around China and right around Russia. And they don't really pay attention to it until it becomes too late and until we get ourselves in a situation where we're now looking at a direct military conflict. And I think that when it comes to something like the Olympics, sure, there are some people who are going to boycott it and make a huge scene of it. But at the end of the day, does that really do anything for them in their daily lives? I would say no, not really.
But boycott it for why? I mean, nobody seriously believes that the United States gives a toss about Chinese Muslims. The United States doesn't like Chinese, doesn't like Muslims. So why would it be in love with Chinese Muslims? I mean, you don't have to be the brain of America to work out something's going on here.
You know, that is the question of the day, truly, and I think you put it perfectly. And it comes back to the fact that the American people, especially here, are still in a place where they don't have to see proof of something in order to believe it. And you would think that we went through this with weapons of mass destruction, and yet now we're in a situation where they hear any kind of figure, they hear, you know, 1 million Uyghurs, and they immediately latch onto that without ever having to see any proof of it, without ever having to question the government that is telling them that, the media that is telling them that. And then at the same time, it's like we don't sit here and talk about the fact that the United States is engaging in helping Saudi Arabia commit a very real genocide in Yemen. We don't talk about the fact that we never get to see the images of that. We never get to see the aftermath of what those U.S. drone strikes look like and the people that are impacted by them. And so I think it comes back to the fact that far too many people are desensitized by this and they just hear something in the media. And yes, as you pointed out, even if they will sit there and say all day long, I don't trust CNN, I don't trust Fox News or the New York Times or whatever it may be, it's as if they latch on to this new theory and they say, well, I can't be the one to question that or to ask where the actual evidence is and why it's not being presented right in front of me.
Of course, most of the world is there, including the United States Olympic team, so they don't feel that strongly about it, or they wouldn't be there. Most of the world's political leaders are there. The boycott is a flop, but most importantly, the visit to Beijing by President Putin opened a new chapter in world affairs, didn't it?
It absolutely did. And, the United States should have seen this coming for miles, which is that when you take two major countries and you point to them and you say, hey, you are both our main targets, well, then that gives those two countries incentives to then work together and to look for different ways that they can come together and that they can rely less on the country that is targeting them, which in this case is the United States. And, I know we've been talking about everything that's been going on in Europe when it comes to the skyrocketing energy prices that we've seen in recent months, when it comes to the fact that Germany literally has a pipeline they just built in connection with Russia that they could be using to help crack down on those energy prices. And yet the reason that they're not seems to come right back to the fact that the United States has been warmongering and scaring them against allowing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to go into existence and to provide the relief that they need in a great way. So then what happens? Well, Russia comes together with China and they agree on a long-term natural gas deal, which this is all that Russia has been asking for from Europe, is they want those long-term deals. They want to be able to give them natural gas at the lowest possible prices, but they want to lock in those long-term deals in order to do it. And Europe has said, no, we don't want to do that. Instead, they want to go about ways that aren't helpful to their people. So what does that do for Russia? Well, then they go over to China and China becomes the customer. And it makes the United States look absolutely ridiculous because not only does it harm Europe in the process, it also puts the U.S. in a situation where these two bad guys it claims it has created are now working together to become even more powerful than before.
Brilliantly put. Lastly, Rachel, it's a busy night. How's Joe? The last time I saw him, he wasn't looking that great.
He doesn't seem to be doing that great. And I think that, we talked about how they don't really want him to give press conferences anymore, how he's tried to stay away from that. Well, this week, his administration looked absolutely ridiculous in the press conferences they did give, in which we had State Department spokesperson Ned Price sitting there refusing to answer the most basic questions about why the United States continues to claim that Russia is about to invade Ukraine. We had Press Secretary Jen Psaki sitting there, and literally when she was asked about how the United States knew, how it had proof that a reported terrorist was the one who blew himself and his family up in Syria, she literally sat there and said, either you believe the United States government or you believe ISIS. So I think that Joe Biden, he may be staying silent now, but his administration is certainly saying a lot, and it's not doing any of them a bit of good right now.
They are in trouble on that front because the worm eventually turns. And this was not some, revolutionary journalist. This was the Associated Press, accredited White House correspondent, who simply said, have you got, any evidence of what you've just said? And he was treated as if he was a foreign agent. But this might terrify some journalists, but it must have an impact on public credibility of what the U.S. state is saying.
Oh, absolutely. And it brings up the fact that, we sit here and say, well, wait a second, we never got proof of weapons of mass destruction. The United States launched an entire war. More than 1 million people died as a result of it. So maybe we should ask for some proof in this case, especially when you have the Biden administration sitting there, not only saying that Russia is planning some sort of false flag, but now because they have turned into the boy who cried wolf, they are upping the ante and claiming that Russia is going to put out some sort of fake video in order to justify an invasion of Ukraine. Well, yeah, you would think that more people in the media would be sitting there going, well, wait a second, where is your proof for this? Do you know, and why are you claiming that this is going to happen? And the fact that just one reporter was able to say that and it made the State Department look as ridiculous as it did this week serves as a reminder of what the media should be doing every single day and what they refuse to do every day.
Rachel Blevins, as always, a delight to talk with you. Thanks for joining us.